Hello, good afternoon, and good morning to some of you, I think. Welcome to the virtual roundtable, Unlocking Opportunities in Canada for Cloud Companies, hosted by BCE Global USA, a Bell Canada company. My name is Phil Shee. I'm the Managing Director of Structure Research. We're an industry-focused research firm based here in Toronto, and I'll be your moderator for today. I'm joined by Cindy Whelan and Andrew Epic of Omdia and Equinix Canada. And we'll let them introduce themselves in just a second. So let's get started. I'll start, I guess, on my virtual left with Andrew. If you could quickly introduce yourself, and then Cindy will introduce herself as well.
Hey, great, Philbert, and thanks for the opportunity. My name is Andrew Epic. I'm the Managing Director for Equinix Canada. Equinix is the world's digital infrastructure company. So we've got a global platform where we feel we can offer all the right places, combining all of the right partners in order to create all the right possibilities. With you, our partner community, and some of the people that are considering coming up to Canada, wanted to just send kind of a personal invitation. I've returned to Canada recently after having done a stint in the UK and Germany in order last fall to relaunch Canada with an acquisition of $1 billion investment into Canada that sees us in 7 more cities. So today I wanted to, I guess, put out a humble ask, and that is for the people here to join us on our Team Canada mission, which is to bring the best of Equinix to Canada and create that digital platform together where we can bring the best of Canada to the rest of the world. So thanks very much, and looking forward to the conversation.
Cindy?
Great, thank you, Philbert, and hi everyone, welcome. My name is Cindy Whelan. I am practice leader for our enterprise networks and wholesale group within Omdia. Now, Omdia is part of Informa. Informa is a global provider of events, digital media and content, and intelligence and analytics. The Omdia brand focuses on the telecom market and was launched in early 2020 to bring together some companies that Informa had acquired over the previous years. Some brands that you might be familiar with, the former Ovum, Heavy Reading, Tractica, and the IHS Markit TMT business. I lead a team of analysts that focus on network transformation, private networks, carrier wholesale, and enterprise network platforms.
Both of you for the introduction. We'll get things kicked off. Cindy, we'll start with you. And just like you to kind of give us an overview, some perspective on the role of service provider networks in supporting the delivery of cloud-based solutions, cloud-based infrastructure services.
Sure, thanks, Philbert. And we've seen the move to the cloud by enterprises for nearly a decade. And in recent years, this shift has accelerated as businesses have moved to digital transformation strategies, have undertaken digital transformation strategies that are designed to make them more agile and more responsive to their business needs and changes in their environment. These efforts emphasize the adoption of cloud services. So this shift by enterprises is generating enormous amounts of capacity, demand for capacity. So enterprises need to access cloud providers and data centers where the applications are hosted and where content is stored. So for these services to meet enterprise needs, the underlying infrastructure, the fiber network, is really critical. Now, the importance of the network has been evident in the increase in fiber infrastructure builds we've seen over the last couple of years. There are fiber upgrades and expansions within national borders and across continents. So, for example, Bell Canada just announced a rollout of 400 gig waves across Canada. We're also seeing activity in developing markets in, say, Latin America, in Africa, where the Jaliba network, the Pan-African network, is going to be built in the coming years, a terrestrial network. Subsea systems are going gangbusters to accommodate the demand for capacity. There's a consortium that's planning the To Africa subsea system, which is going to go around the continent and up into Europe. And then there's the Link system, which was just launched, connecting Latin America to Europe. And then I think there's going to be some legs into Africa as well. And more are underway. Now, the hyperscalers have been really aggressive in building out their fiber infrastructure. So Facebook and Google are each owners or investors in at least 10 systems separately, not even the same systems that have been announced or put into service since 2018. And they've just announced some new systems in Asia. So what we're seeing, what that shows is that the capacity and the diversity and the resilience are really critical today in meeting this increasing demand for content and connectivity. And service providers and hyperscalers are building their infrastructure to meet these needs today, and then also to anticipate future needs. The demand is not going to go down. Now, as the networks expand and businesses move to the cloud, that also gives rise to concerns about data privacy and security. And information carried over the internet, it could be transit or stored in locations maybe outside of national borders from where a company is based, and consequently subject to other nations' laws. So this is raising an issue of data sovereignty. So we're seeing national data privacy laws like GDPR go into effect to protect citizens, but also to protect sensitive data for businesses and governments. And enterprises, as they move to the cloud and undertake this new infrastructure, they have to adhere to these requirements. Penalties are pretty substantial, I think, if they don't. Now, the last piece, you can't talk about network demand and network growth without talking about what we've seen over the last year with COVID. And COVID absolutely demonstrated the role of the network and the data center in supporting access to cloud services. As businesses, everybody scrambled last year to accommodate stay-at-home orders and keep their business going. So this transition dramatically increased pressure on the networks to support not only an increase in capacity demand, but changes in network traffic patterns as well. So before, a provider might see traffic kind of quiet during the day when people are at work or at school, and then in the evening, everything peaks at 6 p.m. Well, the way I heard it described by one provider is now at 6 p.m. all the time. Traffic just stays up. Now, every single provider that we've talked to, Omdia talked to a number of providers last year, everybody said, yep, we did great. The network was resilient. We were able to accommodate these demands. But what I've also heard is from one provider that they're now that the demand is kind of going up, now they're handling or doing upgrades to kind of fortify the network for the next level. So they're almost approaching, I guess, sort of a red zone, if you will. So the networks were originally built to accommodate spikes. We had a major spike last year, so now they're building up again. The other thing that we've heard from providers that they've learned from COVID is some of them can move a lot more quickly than they thought they could. They had to move fast to accommodate the need from their enterprise customers, from their wholesale customers, to increase capacity to meet enterprise needs. And so now they're taking those lessons learned and incorporating that into their regular practices to try to improve service to their wholesale and retail customers. Lastly, I think I would say that from an enterprise perspective, during the pandemic, a lot of companies reduced expenses. They cut back. Nobody knew what was going to happen. But what we saw was that digital infrastructure initiatives still kept going, digital transformation initiatives, they kept going. And I think that what we're going to see in 2021 is for those initiatives to accelerate, and then for those enterprises that had been kind of slow to adopt digital transformation are now realizing we need to do something. We need to increase our cloud connectivity to protect us from another crisis like we saw in 2020. Philbert?
Yeah, great insights. We'll definitely talk a bit more on the data sovereignty and privacy issue further along in this discussion. I'm going to throw in my 2 cents. Definitely, Omdia, your practice focused on the networks and the connectivity side. Structure research, we're focused on compute and storage infrastructure, hyperscale clouds, data center infrastructure. Our tracking matches up with a lot of what you've seen. Organizations continuing to push through, seeing demand. Demand, if not steady, if not increasing, as well as certain profiles in terms of compute consumption shifting or changing in accordance with the new usage patterns. So just to throw one example out there, we're seeing hyperscale cloud infrastructure try to get ahead of the demand, try to get in front of the demand that they're seeing, which is basically not just accelerated their existing plans, but also put more pressure on the commitments they thought they had planned for and they thought would fit the world, and then the world decided to go ahead and not cooperate and and change gears completely. So some great insights there. Just one quick follow-up question before we let Andrew talk about some of the economic cases for entering Canada, Cindy. So cloud providers need to get their services as close to end users as possible for quality service. Of course, there's the data sovereignty issue as well. On the other hand, enterprises also have their own connectivity needs. Can you just maybe share a few more insights around the role of carriers and network providers in helping bridge the gap, specifically around network investments, speed, availability, customer experience, and the ease of doing business?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thanks for the question. So as I said, service providers have made huge infrastructure investments to build out their networks. They already have the deep metro reach to give enterprises the connectivity they need to local offices and data centers to access the applications and the content that's stored in those data centers that they need to run their business. And then they have the broader regional and international connectivity for the multinationals and for cloud providers to provide the interconnection between the data centers for these providers. Now, most recently, they're focusing on enabling infrastructure to support edge computing, so bringing your processing power closer to users to ensure a better experience. Now, we heard from some incumbents that started to repurpose central offices that were being decommissioned as TDM kind of went away, to use those COs to get as edge nodes to get closer to users. But providers can't do this all on their own. The network providers can't do this on their own. Partnerships are going to be key to bringing the content closer to the users. So service providers already partner with other carriers, wholesale providers, to fill physical gaps in the network, say in another country. And they're also partnering with cloud and colo providers to find ways to reduce latency and to ensure quality of service for enterprises going into these data centers. So we've seen a lot of this, certainly in the data center space. So years ago, when cloud was emerging, service providers bought some cloud providers and their associated infrastructure. Subsequently, the service providers spun off those data center assets to companies like Equinix, but they inevitably retained the partnership with those data center operators because they knew that the relationship would be critical to meet the enterprise cloud demand, which is only going to continue to increase. So we're seeing this certainly with the transaction that was announced that Andrew talked about with Bell and Equinix, but there are lots of other examples of providers taking similar steps. Now, you talked about ease of doing business. And beyond just supplying, beyond supplying network reach, providers are also improving processes to make it easy for all of their customers, either they're from the small enterprise up to the largest hyperscalers, to make it easier for them to do business with the operator. And this can mean increasing internal automation, so streamlining processes for quoting, for billing, for service delivery, for maintenance, and so on. Creating APIs to give carrier partners and large customers access to tools or information, or working with cloud providers to get them the capacity, the routes, the information that they need and they need that quickly as they start to think about entering a market. So this, in the end, I think that comes down to just following through, responding quickly to your customers and your partners to facilitate the business, to keep things moving ahead, and then hopefully keep your customers happy and continuing to want to do business with you. Philbert, back to you.
Thanks, Cindy. Definitely agree. I think convergence, I think is a theme, a common thread through what's going on out there, and I think that it's really important to raise that point, especially as we discuss partnerships and cooperation, given the convergence between these different categories. So, Andrew, good to see you, and we'll pivot over to you. If you could share with us the economic case for cloud providers to enter Canada, as well as the role of data centers and network partners, the role they play, the partnerships, and cooperation they need to engage in to enable cloud provider success.
Yeah, no, thanks for the opportunity, Philbert, and great job, Cindy, kind of laying the table with a lot of the insights that you provided. I'll try and pick up on a few of them as to kind of the economics and why we've invested in Canada. There's smart money on both sides of the transaction. And I think the idea of Bell remaining as a platinum partner to Equinix after October 1st, when we made that investment, is a really clear example, Cindy, that you provided. My father-in-law was in the car business for 52 years, and his favorite expression was, "This is not my first rodeo." And on behalf of Equinix, the Bell acquisition was actually the 27th major acquisition that we've done globally. And we continue to invest in these sites with about $3 billion in play right now and about 38 construction projects this year alone. So why are we kind of pouring in when others might be retreating? And I think a lot of the business case that we've come to over the last 20 years is borrowing from Metcalfe's law, which is the network effect. The idea that every incremental participant in an ecosystem basically adds value to not only the existing, but also kind of the incremental joiners. So with that kind of concept in mind, I wanted to give you just kind of a brief review of who we are, where we sit, to then kind of enlighten a little bit more on the economics as to why we see it such a great deal for us. We started brokering those relationships, Cindy, that you referred to, of kind of the regional telcos as our kind of kickoff to the company over 20 years ago. So Equal Internet Exchange, Equinix, is basically the project of trying to scale the internet in a North American context. So we were selected in an original RFP that started to connect different network providers that then evolved into what is kind of the efficiency of the internet. Chapter 2 was there was a lot of content providers that were looking for those intersection points because of the density of workloads that were kind of transitioning those packets of data back and forth. So 5 of the world's largest websites globally reside within our buildings in the first couple of years of their existence because they want to get access to those all important kind of traffic intersection points. The interesting thing is that enterprises started to kind of creep into the ecosystem, and financial services companies were the first because they found a way to use latency, low latency, and highly secure connections as a way to arbitrage different markets where instead of measuring in milliseconds for transactions, they get the opportunity in our private environments and in a highly interconnected way to arbitrage the market in microseconds. So the moral to the story to this point is the idea that it's what's inside that counts. It's those interactions between the organizations with themselves, the network providers and the cloud providers, and we feel that we're well positioned to kind of create that space for those transfer points to happen. We came to a critical point in our evolution about it's over a half dozen years ago now, almost a decade, where we had the opportunity with all these great assets to become a cloud provider. But we really paused it as an organization and thought closely about where we can continue to add value. And that's one of enabling cloud providers. Because for us to have our value based in neutrality, for us to then kind of compete in these same markets that we would ultimately be trying to serve would be a really difficult compromise for us. So we stayed the course, and we're really positioned well as an enabler of clouds and these on-ramps. About 40% of the on-ramps globally for cloud providers intersect through our buildings. We added another 20 more just this last quarter. So this idea of Metcalfe's law and this ecosystem becoming more and more mature, and that being a place that is important, where all of these partners gather together in order to create all of these digital possibilities, is truly at the core of how we think we differentiate ourselves in the market. So fast forward today, you've got a platform that's global and trusted by about 10,000 customers. It's about 230 buildings in about 63 cities around the world. So we get a unique vantage point along with our customers to see how to continue to optimize the interactions with some of these largest enterprises, both evolving into a cloud strategy as well as born in the cloud. And the measure of our success is obviously the return on the investments of these buildings that we buy, but we are measured quite closely on a quarterly basis on the amount of interconnections that we have happening within those buildings. And we're edging towards 400,000 unique and discrete interconnection points, both physical and virtual, within our buildings. So there's a whole lot of stickiness that basically, again, continues to add value to those customers around the world. So why Canada? 10th largest economy in the world, $28 billion spend according to IDC, 5th largest producer of clean energy globally. And we've got a real sensitivity to that. And we can probably chat about that a little bit more. But we've got basically a very well-educated group of enterprises that somewhat were at a bit of a pause because of, to your reference point, Cindy, those data sovereignty restrictions, and demanding that these large providers basically have some form of offering that not all data has to be treated with such care, but the important stuff, and from a Canadian perspective, needs to reside within Canada. So there's this kind of pent up, if you will, demand, whereas these cloud providers arrived within Canada. We had actually preceded them. So, I mean, we had some of our offerings basically set up without any cloud providers local to connect to them. But obviously in the last 3 to 4 years, that's really dramatically changed as well. So the 3 vectors of opportunity that I see, and I wanted to point them out for the audience here, because I think we probably share the opportunity at hand, and that's on domestic, on import, as well as export. So from a domestic perspective, again, 10th largest economy, in the relationship with Bell, we not only inherited a significant amount of sites, but 600 customers. And Bell Canada, as just a platinum partner in our perspective, has access to over 98% of the enterprises and residential up here in Canada. So we couldn't see a better fit to kind of go after the domestic market, and a better partner in Bell to basically service those existing clients. Where it becomes a little bit more interesting is you take Equinix, this global organization that has 10,000 customers around the world, and start to look at some of the key numbers that drive our revenue, that's seen 73 quarters of sequential growth. So 62% of our revenue comes from customers and enterprises that have us in locations on basically the 3/3 of how we divide up the globe. So they're in the Americas, they're in Europe, they're in APAC with us, and they represent 62% of our revenue. 90% of our revenue is recurring from that existing customer base. So what it tells me from an import opportunity is when you start to think about the alignment that Canada has through agreements like CETA, the Comprehensive European Trade Agreement, over 90% of our trade with Europe is for free. But then you also couple that with the Canadian context of North-South, with the newly minted and negotiated last year, the USMCA agreement, you have now access to these markets. So whether it's PIPEDA and its alignment with GDPR in Europe and allowing us that kind of frictionless trade and kind of a friendly landing spot, companies who set up in Canada and their digital platform can then also have the pivot down south into a lucrative and very mature market that I think a lot of the audience probably already realizes and serves. The final vector of opportunity is one of export. So if you go back to kind of the Hudson's Bay Company and the natural resources that Canada has, we've got a kind of a culture of collaboration and compromise. We also have a culture of export. And from my perspective as kind of a proud Canadian and exec leader in this good nation, why shouldn't we have the opportunity to be digital exporters as well? And our customers basically asked for it. We had the large banks globally doing transactions, of which kind of in a daily basis, we've got markets and financial services kind of in New York and London and Frankfurt and Hong Kong, whereas an example, the large banks in Canada would have found us in those places because of the opportunity for them to export and kind of compete in an equally efficient way as those companies that were finding us more regionally. So I think, yeah, all in all, the idea of a domestic business, an import business, as well as an export business really positions all of us well to partner and kind of create the push towards this kind of digital edge that continues now to these 7 new cities in Canada. At the outset, I talked about all the right places and all the right partners that create all the right possibilities. So just to double click to kind of get us set up for some of the, hopefully the follow-on discussion in the breakout rooms of the panel. All the right places is not only the physical buildings, Philbert and Cindy, but it's also the Equinix fabric that will knit those buildings together so that you have access globally to these workloads literally at the point of these on-ramps. So all of these buildings are connected, again, using network providers, and as well as the advantage of kind of a software-defined networks to make sure that you're equally able to hop on in Frankfurt, but get access to workloads in Singapore and Silicon Valley. So there's a right places is not only the building, but is enhanced by this fabric. Point two of what we think we differentiate ourselves is the digital exchange. So edge services are something that we kind of collaborate with partners to make sure that the historical idea of these long haul routes and figuring out what your security purchase of assets and software is going to be, and then the way that you kind of create your data sets and kind of set up your endpoints, we wanted to make that easier by working with partners to combine and create those solutions. But I think most importantly, do it in a way, and this is all the right possibilities, where to Cindy's point, we want it to be in an open API framework. So are all the right possibilities really speak to empowering the DevOps community with open APIs. So the idea of creating these frameworks that can be accessed so that collaborators in the industry can kind of come up with those best solutions. Uber wouldn't be Uber without Google Maps, and at one point kind of getting advantage of each other in that regard. Neither would Airbnb if they didn't have kind of the transactional and online digital payments that also are participants within the Equinix ecosystem. So there's all of these kind of combinations and permutations of building these solutions because customers don't necessarily, and enterprises don't necessarily know what the requirements are yet. So finding a place that is vendor neutral, highly dense with options and partners to participate with, but then in particular regions, just the absolute luxury of having a partner like Bell Canada to take those long haul routes and be that good partner to those trade-offs. It became very clear for us to write $1 billion check and to lean in enthusiastically into a market where sometimes people were shedding kind of the data center assets. So looking forward to the back and forth, Philbert, but that kind of sets the table at least as to where we think we sit in the value chain.
Yeah, thanks for that, Andrew. And just to add just a quick data point, just speaking of how young and how much upside is left in the Canadian market. If you think about public cloud infrastructure crossing the border and being in country in Canada, that's actually a pretty recent phenomenon. I think you can probably date Amazon's entry, for example, to about 2016-17, whereas public cloud first came online in the US in 2006. So it took about a decade for in-country public cloud infrastructure to arrive north of the border, and we really aren't that far. So, so it did take a little bit. Before we move to maybe just some kind of open discussion in Q&A, maybe Andrew, just quickly, you provided a great overview. Maybe if you could just give us a little bit of feedback, or maybe an example on the Equinix Bell Canada relationship, and how some of the world's well-known digital leaders or logo companies are maximizing their opportunities through it.
Yeah, and I think both sides, Philbert, come with kind of rich relationships and experiences. Ours more outside of the country and Bell more locally. So if you think of Cisco as a recent intersection point, as we roll out Fabric, Cisco selected us for various POPs that they would have in order to make the WebEx experience more rich in Canada. And Bell Canada being I think they were the 2020 Service Provider Partner of the Year for Cisco, it just makes for a real easy marriage because there's a depth of understanding and a deep relationship on the Bell side. But Cisco basically has been offering WebEx and SD-WAN solutions on our platform. And kind of we have very high level relationships where all of these things are almost cookie cutter at this point for when we open our next market, these kind of known name brand service providers and infrastructure providers kind of pile in because we make it such a consistent and easy experience for them to kind of to roll out. So that's kind of a 1-2 punch that went real easy in the first 90 days was Cisco came to market to enhance WebEx, and it became pretty obvious that Equinix and Bell were the right two to kind of engage in order to get that done quickly and well.
Yeah, and no shortage, of course, people using web conferencing these days, as we are right now.
Timing is everything.
Yeah, timing is. So I'm going to throw some questions at you guys, some discussion points. This is meant for both of you, but we'll start with Cindy. So you've mentioned, I think in your remarks, both of you, how the network acts as the foundation of digital transformation, both for Canadian businesses and their cloud providers. If you could just provide us a quick overview, what are some of the common networking challenges cloud providers face when entering a new market like Canada?
Sure, and I'll start. And Andrew can speak probably more to the specifics of Canada, but what I'd like to start with is just more general. The big thing is gaining access to users. The cloud providers want to be close to customers. They need the local expertise and proximity, and require the network providers to help them gain access to as many customers, as many eyeballs as they possibly can. And they also need the access to the data centers, their network of where their content and their applications are hosted. And this is where, like, service providers, the national providers' metro and long haul reach comes into play. And Andrew mentioned this a few minutes ago when he talked about the fabric that Equinix has developed to provide the interconnection, so no matter where you are in the world, you can get to content located in these different different places. So the service providers have the depth to reach the eyeballs the cloud providers want, and the breadth and high capacity services to get that data where it needs to be, and to get users where they need to be. Now, as we just said, video is the main driver for traffic today, and video distribution is key for gaming, for streaming, for meeting services. Everything's video now. And capabilities like gaining access to these high capacity services that are reliable with low latency and guaranteed quality of service is what the cloud providers want. So again, it all comes back to that interconnectivity, to ensuring the connectivity between the networks and the data centers, to create that high quality experience. I think from a network perspective, the biggest hyperscalers they certainly have the financial resources to go into any build their own networks wherever they pretty much like, but there's risk with that and significant expense, not to mention the time that's required. If they have to start laying fiber, they've got to get the approvals and the trenching, and it's a big deal. So it makes more economic sense and operational sense for them to try to find a service provider that has the national presence. They've got the local expertise, the national expertise to deliver the level of service the cloud provider needs, and a willingness to work with that cloud provider to get them the information they need and to get them the types of services they need. So I think that's where I would start. And then Andrew, do you want to talk maybe a little bit more about specifics with Canada?
Yeah, I guess the most obvious one to us up here is the vastness of the geography. I mean, there's 5.5 time zones up here, and when Equinix finally decided to push out its edge to pick up those 8 cities that are of significance, you had to go to most of those time zones. So the idea of digging a trench 5,000 plus kilometers is just a non-starter. But I think when you start to again kind of compress the timeline, to your point, it's my firm belief that digital transformation is a team sport. There is really economies that can be gained from finding partners and collaborators that have kind of the same sensibility around how important it is to be agile and flexible and ready, and perhaps paying per usage rather than some long, arduous contracts, and making sure that we can respond in hours, maybe even minutes, rather than days, weeks, and months to come up with a solution. So yeah, I think network providers and data center providers and service providers alike are dealing with a much more sophisticated user base. And I mean, you throw in things like global pandemics, and the things that were once theoretical and RFP driven become, how do we make sure that we're still engaged with our employees next week? So you better have some concept of who the friendlies are, within particular markets, hopefully find a neutral place where those kind of exchanges can be made, but they're made in a way that's optimized for the customer, but moreover constructed in a way where you can still maintain your uniqueness. So I can't say enough to the kind of the open API community and the idea of, I think, yeah, nobody's naive enough to think that they want to leave their customer at a border or leave the experience at a particular exchange between partners. So it'll be in the uniqueness of the value of the offering and how well you put kind of your building blocks on top of these more kind of robust and interchangeable environments between network, data center, and service provider to really come up with the solutions you need. So long way around to say it's a big country, it's a small timeline, and this idea of a monolithic approach and kind of go on your own is just not going to give you the speed and agility and the presence to keep these very sophisticated customers still engaged.
Thanks for that, Andrew. And for our American friends, you did not hear that wrong. That was 5.5 time zones. Yes, it is currently, it is 1:40 here in Toronto, but it is also 90 minutes ahead in Newfoundland and Labrador. So in case you thought that was a little odd, no, we do have a place in the country that's on the half when it comes to the time zone. Really tough to figure if you're trying to book a business meeting or something. We'll continue with the Canadian content, and I think we're going to move and quickly discuss data sovereignty. And I think at this time we were going to bring in another member of the BCE team, Robin Constantine, who's the head of global sales at BCE Global. Hopefully we'll have the events team virtually move him into this forum. As that happens, maybe we'll just kick off and get feedback from, hopefully from Robin and Andrew. So data sovereignty, obviously increasingly important for enterprises, which means it matters to cloud providers, of course, that host their workloads and data, and for those who are looking to do business and serve customers in Canada. Maybe let's start. Are there important pieces of legislation that cloud providers should be aware of when they plan for expanding north of the border? Maybe we'll start with you, Robin, since you just joined.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. By the way, great conversation, Cindy and Andrew. Really, there's a lot of points that I was just chewing just to get on. But clearly, in regards to data sovereignty, apart from a lot of the rulings that have been laid out by governments, especially in Canada. Clearly, what we're hearing from the business perspective, so from the Equinix and the other cloud service providers or the other hyperscalers, is how do I ensure that not only I meet those regulations, but and more importantly, how do I meet my customers' needs about ensuring that we keep the data in sovereignty in Canada? And clearly, being part of that ecosystem and being part of the dialogues that we have with lots of our hyperscalers and cloud service providers, we as a company basically have invested in look at it this way, 3 routes going east and west, right? So basically, if you're going from Vancouver to Toronto, we now have 3 routes, and 2 of them are basically in Canada, so they'll never traverse down in the United States. Not that we don't like the United States, on the contrary, it's our customers are asking us that question, saying make sure that the bits and bytes are staying in Canada. So this is all part of being a partner, understanding where the bouncing ball, where things are going, and early in that process, Philbert, we understood that, and we actually went out and constructed that 3rd route, which will give you full-on diversity from the west to the east and east to the west.
Yeah, nice job, Robin. And you've left me with not much else to add, but I might just kind of point out that because we have exposure to so many markets and so many countries around the world, regardless of the meteoric rise of cryptocurrency or these large companies and social media companies that are becoming larger in their revenue than some pretty prominent countries are in their GDP, there is still a national kind of perspective, a cultural set of values around privacy and sovereignty and access that nations are always challenging even what we think today is the status quo. I think there's recent kind of events in Australia with Google, or the European Union continuing to invite some of these large companies back to kind of test each other on the bounds of access and the bounds of how they're monetizing it. So I would just say that don't think that this story is ever done. There'll always be a race to optimize on cost. There'll always be kind of a pushing of perspective to make sure that people are comfortable with what's going on. But as far as Canada goes, I mean, a 100-year-plus institution of knowing intimately what enterprises and customers culturally value, but then as well the interaction with governments, both provincial and federal, to know what the laws are focused on that. I mean, what a great guide in Bell Canada to help us with that. We would humbly just bring that there's loads of similarities with GDPR with Canada that might be a little bit unique to the US. So we'll kind of give our flavoring based on our global perspective, but really take the lead of our partners and these large national carriers wherever we do business, because they've usually thought about all the hard questions in the context of that nation and those sovereign borders. So yeah, I think again is that there's a mindfulness of it globally, but it'll realize itself regionally on an ongoing basis, and it is subject to change.
Agreed.
Yeah. Maybe Robin would give you the last word on this topic. Just maybe tell us a little bit of some of the ways Canadian network providers are helping cloud providers meet the requirements set down by government or their own end users.
Yeah, well, I mean, maybe what I would like to do is just chime in on 2 points, one from Cindy and one from Andrew. I mean, Cindy's point around the content service providers and what they're seeking as they're entering into new markets, and specifically this one in Canada. Clearly, what Bell is trying to position itself is really its assets. What are these assets? It's really its customers, right? You know, we have millions and millions of wireline, wireless eyeballs that across this country, and what's the value for our partners is getting close to these eyeballs. So obviously that's, I think, apart and beyond the network, that's what we also bring to the equation, is this just incredible amount of assets of customers that are also seeking to get access to the content service providers. So that's one big piece that we have to remember. And Bell, from where it sits, doesn't just sit here and just anticipate and wait. We are proactively investing in our network as well. So we're on what I would call a generation investment of moving towards more fiber to the homes, more fiber to the business. Actually, it's a $20 billion investment over the last 5 years. We're in the third or fourth year of our program. We've beefed up these investments for this year and next year, just basically tying to the point of Cindy before. It's 6 p.m. every day, all the time, right? And therefore, there's a lot of demand. So clearly, we've put forward this type of investments. The last piece that I want to talk about is to Andrew, and I like the analogy of the vectors about import, export in the domestic market. Where I sit within BCE, I'm the importer, I'm the exporter, and by doing that, I'm doing it through the bridges, right? So we're the ones offering the possibility to a lot of that ecosystem to talk to each other, being from Montreal to Toronto, or from Montreal to Vancouver, or from Montreal to New York, Toronto to Chicago, or beyond, right? We're the bridges, and obviously. Collaborating with the hyperscalers, the Equinix of this world. How do we actually tie this together? It's through the Bell network. So we're continuing to do massive investments across our network on the long haul. Cindy, you mentioned something which is true. We've launched our 400G service across the country, and clearly we will continue to do that. And the reason why is just the demand is so high on how people talk to each other and basically transact with each other. So I definitely think there's a great future, and what we're trying to do from a BC perspective is really becoming that bridge, that enabling bridge to get these transactions done and be part of that Canadian fabric.
Thanks, Robin. I want to be sensitive to time and leave enough time for everyone to network, but we want to touch on just one more quick topic before we move there, virtually, of course. In this environment, we're hearing more about companies factoring in a provider's corporate social responsibility or environmental perspective or social governance policies, and these are being built into RFPs. Just want to quickly get both your thoughts. Maybe we'll start with you, Andrew, but what are Equinix and BCE Global doing in these areas?
Yeah, no, thanks for the opportunity. And while it's often kind of an end point to a discussion and an also to a discussion, what we're trying to do at Equinix is really make it part of the fabric of every decision that we make. So we talked about the power of the ecosystem, and we feel both in our hiring practice as well as how we engage a diversity of thought and a diversity of the human resources that are most important to us. You get better ideas when you get people that are different and can challenge each other, as well as you show up in a market when you're a good reflection of the broadest kind of lens of that society. So on a social perspective, it's front and center for us. And we espouse this idea of that we're safe, we belong, and we matter. And if an employee has the opportunity to bring kind of their fullest self to the work, they'll be passionate about it, and you'll kind of, as a company, get the best return on investment. When it comes to the environmental part, to me, again, I think it's a no-brainer. If you operate efficiently, whether it's your car or your data center, you're going to put out less waste into the environment. Canada is the 5th largest producer of green energy, but Equinix globally has a mission to go 100% green on its power. And to think of the power that a data center processes, but to put that commitment, it is not an insignificant investment in order to achieve it, but it's the right one for the future of what we want to be, which is a historically significant company that's enabling a long-term view of kind of good old planet Earth and all of the participants. So we put it into action in all of our investments. We went out for a debt offer in Europe just this last week, raising about $2.6 billion of debt, but we reserved $1 billion of that, so more than a third, to basically be green bonds. So to have that money and the associated funds being governed by a higher level of scrutiny that is associated with kind of how green we're doing, what the carbon kind of footprint is, the sustainability of the water that we use, the waste that we put out. So yeah, it's a kind of a money where your mouth is proposal, and it's something that we want to make sure is in all of our decisions rather than just a kind of a check in the box in an RFP.
I maybe wanted to echo one thing in regard to diversity. I'm 100% with what Andrew's mentioned, and obviously us as Bell, from a Bell and BC perspective, we've invested quite in that cultural change, because it is a cultural change, and we're there, and I think there's still a lot of room for us to work in this, all of us. But what I'd like to talk about is that green energy. I have the privilege of living in Montreal, and this province has invested heavily in hydroelectricity, right? Green, right? And so that has even position the province as well as not only a place where you can bring in your data centers to be efficient. Hence why I'm wearing also a sweater, because obviously in May it's still cold, right? Therefore, it's a great place to operate. So I think the combination of green energy, the climate has also been a perfect place for data center operators like Equinix to establish a foothold in Canada. And clearly, we're seeing it from all our customers, that it be wholesale and or enterprise. The shift to green is critical and important, in not only in our dealings on a transactional basis, but even on RFPs, as you mentioned, Philbert. So it is super important that we all think that way, and how we can tactically apply it is through some of the work that's being done today in Canada through its green energy.
Again, want to be sensitive to time. Thanks for the great feedback, the great discussion, Cindy, Andrew, Robin, and all the attendees who taking time out of the day to join us. We'll also keep an eye out for the registration link. There is a next virtual roundtable that BCE Global will be hosting. It's called the Cloud Provider's Guide for Dynamic Entry into the Canadian market. Thanks.